In our reflection, we looked at how the devil uses disobedience. He encourages us to disobey God's command. And in doing so, he pushes us to a point where we do things that makes us fall from grace. And we saw that in the life of Adam and Eve last week, if you remember. And we saw what it means to fall from grace, which is still the consequence of what we experience every day in our lives, being born into original sin. Well, today I want to talk about the opposite of what we talked about last week. So, when we disobey God, it leads to falling from grace. Now, when we obey God, what happens? And this morning I want to talk about obedience that comes through faith. And I want to use the example of the man who is referred to in scriptures as our father in faith. We listen to his story in today's first reading, Abraham. Abraham is known as our father. He's referred to as our father in faith. So I'd like to use Abraham as an example this morning. And we're going to do a little Bible study group this morning, if you don't mind. Both for those of you who are following from home and those of you who are in the church. So, talking about faith, let's ask the question, what is faith? So, if someone were to ask you what faith is, what will you say? Anyone? What is faith? And don't go too deep. Don't talk about, some theological thing. Don't go too deep. Just simple. Basic faith. Basic catechism. Yes. Dominic, I saw your hand up. What is faith? Believing without seeing. So two things there. To believe something that you cannot see. That's excellent. Who else? What is faith? So Dominic says believe without seeing. What else? What thoughts are running through your mind? What is faith? Oh yeah. Yeah. What? Trust. Wow, that's very deep. She's getting deeper now. So believe without saying to trust. Of course, to believe is trust, right? Good job. Trust. I was reading an article this week about faith. And guess how the author of the article defines faith? And it has all the elements of trust and belief. He says faith, and please listen to this definition of faith because this is very important. He says faith is the appropriation. I love the word. Appropriation. He says faith is when we appropriate God's work in our lives. And you are English speakers, so you understand what the word appropriation means. So that when we live in faith, what we are doing is we are activating or appropriating God's works, which we cannot see, miracles in our lives. We activate God's work. When we live in faith, we move God's hand to do certain things in our lives that are unimaginable. So, stay with the word appropriation. Remember, we talked about believing, trust, something we cannot see. Appropriation. Now, a very good example of someone who appropriated God's work in his life is the man I just referred to, Abraham. And there are lots of people like that in scriptures. But let's talk about Abraham. Abraham was someone who at the different points, at the different times in his life, he appropriated, he lived in faith. He activated God's work. He made God function in his life in some miraculous way. And this morning I want us to see how living in faith can help us to appropriate God's work in our lives in obedience. So how did Abraham do this? When God introduced himself to Abraham and entered into a covenant with Abraham, what was Abraham's condition at the time? Abraham was rich, but he had no child. He had no child from his wife Sarah. They both were well on in years and they had no child. And God, to prove to Abraham that he is God, And the difference between God and man is that God does what man cannot do. So to prove to Abraham that he is God in what he does, he said to Abraham, you're going to have a child. And this child, it is through this child that you're going to have millions of other children. Thousands and millions of generations after you will come through this child. And so God made a promise. The next question I have this morning is, does anyone know how long it took God to fulfill that promise? So between the promise and the coming of Isaac, how many years? Any guess? It's a long time. Yeah. Sorry? 1 year? Not exactly. That's so close. I wish it happened in a year. Yeah. Yeah. Austin. What? Yeah. Oh, that will have been interesting. If mothers can have kids in 6 months, I'm sure they will prefer it to 9 months, right? Yeah. Unfortunately, that miracle doesn't happen, even with our Blessed Mother, right? Yeah. Any guess? Was a long time. Sorry? 40? It wasn't as long as that. Any guess? Yeah, Julie. 20. Can you add 5 to that? If you add 5 to 20, how many years? 25. So God made a promise, and from the time he made the promise to the time he fulfilled it was 25 years. Why? Was God incapable of fulfilling that promise 9 months after? So when God made a promise to Abraham, Abraham went straight to his calendar, right? And started counting. 3 months, my wife is going to be pregnant. She still wasn't. 6 months, he checked with his wife. Aren't you pregnant? No, I'm not. 9 months. Aren't you pregnant? No, I'm not. Are you sure? We should go see the doctor. Oh, what's happening? Okay, let's give God extra 3 months. They gave God a whole year. She's not even pregnant. How much more of having a child? And Abraham was, of course, running out of patience. And the child came 25 years after, when Abraham was 100 years old. Any reason why God left it that late? Does anyone know? Jace, do you know why God left it that late? I love your voice. That's why I asked you the question. Yeah. You have no idea? Why? Pat? Why did God leave it this late? To test his faith? Okay. You're getting closer. But let's go back to the word appropriation. Let's go back to that word. If faith is how we appropriate God's work, his miracle in our lives, what do you think God was offering Abraham? Was he not offering Abraham the opportunity to appropriate God's work in his life? That's exactly what happened. Even when Abraham was running out of patience, still he trusted. And his trust was what was needed, was the seed that was needed to activate the miracle in his life. And it took 25 years. Okay, stay with me. The child comes after 25 years. He's named the child of promise, Isaac. And then maybe the child was only 2 years or 3 or 7 years or 10 years, I can't remember exactly. God comes back to Abraham again. Remember, these two were friends, already friends at this time. God came to Abraham like he always does. And he says, Abraham, how are you doing? And Abraham said, cool, now I'm a father of a child. And God said, well, how is Isaac doing? Oh, Isaac is doing great. He's just growing into maturity. And God said, Abraham, I need you to do something. Stay with me. And that's what we read in today's first reading. What did God ask Abraham to do? He said, I want you to take that boy. Remember, that's the child of promise, right? God said, through this boy, you're going to get millions and millions of children. Millions. Generations will come after him. Remember, that's God's promise. And God says, take that boy, go build an altar, and instead of sacrificing, now let's not look at the morality of that. That's not what we're talking about this morning. Instead of sacrificing a ram or a goat, as the case should be, or a lamb, God says, I want you to bound that boy, put him on the altar, and actually sacrifice him. Why did God do that? Why? Is it because he's a cruel God? Or was he wanting to find out whether Abraham will do what he's asked him to do or not? I don't think that's the answer, because God knows exactly what Abraham was going to do. God knows what's running through your mind now. He knows your thoughts. So he doesn't need to check you out to know what you're going to do. He knows. He knows what you're going to do tomorrow, even before you know it. So why, if God wasn't wanting to find out something, why did God ask Abraham to sacrifice the child of promise? Any guess? Put on your thinking caps now. Okay, Austin. So, yeah. Okay, good job. Thanks. Nice try. Anyone? Why? Don't get too deep. Yeah. I know you're doing this Bible in 1 year, and you guys are, that's what happened in Langan when I asked this question. Already they were, yeah. Don't get too deep. Stay with me. Why? With Abraham. There was a reason. Abraham was going to profit something. Why did God ask Abraham? What was the profit in asking Abraham to sacrifice Isaac? Yes, Dominic. To test his faith? You're getting closer. Because by testing his faith, what happens to his faith? Sorry? Did someone say something? Oh, you're getting closer. Yeah, you hit it. Okay, so, and this is going to explain why we go through adversity in life. This is going to explain this morning why we go through trials in life. And that's why I'm really spending time on this. So God tested Abraham because it is only through testing that faith can grow. God tested Abraham so that his faith, to enlarge his faith. So the next question is, why does God need your faith to grow? Why? Yeah, Julie. You can get someone? So that you can get to heaven? Yeah, you're getting closer. Mm-hmm. Yeah, anyone else? Why does God require your faith to grow? To pour more blessings on you, you are getting closer. Now, let me use this analogy. When you go to the gym, for those of you who go to the gym, and you start working out in the gym, what happens to your muscles? What? They get stronger and what? Bigger. So when you go to the gym and you exercise your muscles, they get bigger and they get stronger. So that means when you don't exercise, then your muscles, of course, shrink, if there's anything like that. Now, another analogy. Let me use this. So growing up back home, I went to the junior seminary when I was 11. And then when I finished the junior seminary, which is like junior high or senior high, I went into the major seminary when I was 16. Now, in the major seminary, both in the junior and the major seminary, we had no running water at the beginning. But we had a river or a stream close by. And every morning, we will go to the river or the stream to fetch water. We'll fetch water and put some in the kitchen so that the cooks will use that to cook our meals. We had cooks. And then we fetch some to wash ourselves and to do our laundry. Now, when we go to the river, what do we need to take with us to bring back water? Sorry, Dominic? We need a bucket. Cool, that's right. So we take a bucket, go to the river, we get some water, and we'll bring it back to the seminary. Now, what determines the quantity of water that you fetch? Sorry? The size of your bucket. If you want to get so much water, you go with a bigger bucket. If you want to get little, you go with a smaller container, isn't it? Okay, folks, your faith is your bucket. Does that make sense? Your faith is your bucket, and the river is where God's blessings flows in abundance. There is no shortage of it. There's no shortage of it. The problem is if you go to the river with a smaller container, you're going to come back with fewer blessings. Does that make sense? And because God knows that the container determines how much blessings you bring home, what does God want to do? As a loving father, he wants to expand the size of your bucket. Now, Laverne, coming back to the answer you gave, so that he can receive more blessing. I love the way Scriptures puts it very clearly here. And let's just look at that. James tells us what trials does. He says, for we know that when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow your endurance. Other versions of the Bible says, for we know that when your faith is tested, your perseverance grows. If you are part of the Mary's Mantle consecration, and you're doing the consecration, you know that on Thursday, we prayed for the virtue of perseverance. How do we get perseverance? Through test, through adversity. So now you know when you're going through trials time are not times to get mad at God and listen to the lies of the devil, where he says, you're going through trials because God doesn't care. We go through trials because God wants to expand the bucket. And that bucket is called what? Faith. That's what it's called. You want to expand you want to enlarge your muscles, you will have to go to the gym. Going to the gym is not fun. I used my treadmill yesterday and I had to beat myself up to do it. Wasn't fun. Did I enjoy it after that? Yes. But to start the workout, oh boy, you need to beat yourself to do it. That's the same thing with trial. Unfortunately, it's not fun. But the resultant effect of it is then your faith is enlarged, and that faith is enlarged, then you can appropriate God's work in your life. The other reason why God tested Abraham, and this is very important. Remember, the first one is to enlarge the size of his bucket. The other reason why God tested Abraham was because God knows that when faith is not enlarged, it shrinks. And God knows that the common temptation that we suffer from, and you see that every day, is that we have what we refer to as dead faith. And you want to know one church, of all the number of churches in the world, maybe there are over 2-3 million churches in the world, even including Islam. I'm bold to say that where you find dead faith most is in the Catholic Church. And it's unfortunate. And I'm not only saying in the pews, but even on the altar. I'm talking about even with priests. You come to the Catholic Church, it's where faith is not exercised. Let me tell you an experience I had on Friday. So this parishioner of mine, she's suffering from cancer. And she's been going through all kinds of treatments. And God has been using that to cure her. And then suddenly she was told that, look, the cancer is becoming, it's growing in her body, and she needed to change her treatment. Guess what she did on Friday evening? First of all, she sent me a text, and she said, oh, are you free for a chat? And I said, yeah. And what she did was, because she just went to Ebidero to see her doctor, and they changed her medication. So she put her medication on the table, she took a picture of all of it, and she asked me if I was going to Mass, and I said, yes, in the next couple of minutes I'll be going to Mass. And she sent me the picture of her new meds. Why? Does anyone know why? Sorry? So she said, this was her request, can you take that picture with you, Father, on your phone to Mass? And just pray that God will use these medications to bring me healing. What do you call that? appropriation of faith. In this culture, she's dumb. In this culture, in Western culture, she's stupid. How do you think of that? I mean, that doesn't make sense, but faith doesn't make sense. Faith doesn't make sense. It's not rocket science. Remember what Dominic said? He said, believe without knowing. You believe without knowing, and we're going to come to that. So God knows that when faith is not activated, you get what we call dead faith. Now, what's the definition of dead faith? This is going to amuse you this morning. So I wake up in the morning with a headache. And I've got a few nurses here in the church, so they're probably going to help me with this. And what do I go? What do? I go to my cabinet where I leave all my first aid drugs. And I look up at my cabinet and I see this particular one, and what is written on it is Advil. I'm not advertising this. So I pick this bottle, I go over it to read what problem it solves. And I'm reading, oh yeah, and this is going to help me with my headache. Take 1 to 2 in every 6 hours. And I'm saying, yeah, this is great. Yeah, I've taken Advil before. And in fact, when I took it, it got rid of my headache instantly. And I'm saying, oh yeah, and I'm reading it, and I'm agreeing with everything it says on the label. What is the next thing I'm going to do? Any guess? Dominic, what do you think I'll be doing with it? Sorry? I'll get water, right? And then I'll take 2 of it, and I will swallow it. But guess what I did? After agreeing that this is the right medication for me, I took it, look at it, and say, oh, this is great. And I put it back in the cabinet. And I spend the rest day with my headache. That is how you define dead faith. This is the textbook definition of dead faith. Yes, Lord, I know you can do it. Oh yeah, I know, Lord, you can do it. And when it comes to the time to actually trust that he can do it, what do? We step back and we're looking for science to tell us what to do. Science that is limited. Is that not the same approach to this virus? Where is our trust? We throw it away. We throw it away. We say, yeah, this is going to work. But when it is time to take it, we put it back in the cabinet. That's what happens. Listen to what Jesus said on the night before his resurrection, and I love this text. This is Jesus talking to Peter. Peter was just about to deny Jesus. Listen to what Jesus told Peter. He says, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan has asked, so Satan asked for permission, has asked to sift you. You English speakers, you know the meaning of the word sift. Sift you as wheat. But I have prayed for you, Simon, that your faith will not fail. God prays for you every time you go through adversity because he doesn't want you to fall. That is not the goal of adversity. And he says, and when you have turned back to your true self, you must strengthen your brothers. Let's go back to the word sift. Why do you sift something? Laverne, why do you sift something? To purify, because there are some things inside that is not needed. This is why you go through adversity, folks. This is why I go through adversity. Because there are things in me that does not allow me to enjoy the blessings that comes from God, and only adversity, Good Friday, can sift it. This is why God allows it, so that my faith can come alive. I'm going to use one last analogy for you tonight, not tonight, this morning. And if everything I have said hasn't made sense, this is going to make sense. Stay with me. Let's move quickly to the last slide. Does anyone recognize this animal? It's not in North America. You don't find them here. Actually, there's a car model that is named after this animal. Sorry? I can't hear you. Can you, with your mask, I can't hear. Yeah, this is the African Impala. You find this in Africa. African Impala. So, what is an African Impala? Look at what it does. The African Impala can jump to a height of over 10 feet. Go back again. Let's go back again to look at the picture. Oh, what am I doing? I want to go back, but you see, can you see the legs? You see it jumping? Now see what it see what it can do. Uh-oh. Yeah. Okay. So the African Impala can jump to a height of over 10 feet and cover a distance greater than 30 feet. Yet, these magnificent creatures can be kept in an enclosure in any zoo with a 3-foot wall. Can you imagine that? Why? Because the African Impala will not jump if they cannot see where their feet will fall. Aren't we like African Impalas? Yeah, Pat, that's funny, right? Does that not capture who you are? I've got to see it to believe it. Is that not the story of our world today? Don't give me that crap. Science cannot prove it, so I cannot believe it. Yet you have the ability to get there. But because you need to see, you're not going to take the leap, then you are never going to move. And what happens is your faith is dead. What is God calling you to? He's calling you to pray. When Jesus said to his disciples, pray for an increase of faith, now you understand why. Can you pray this week and say, Lord, anything that is dead about my faith, Lord, sift it away. Make me have a living faith. And Lord, help my faith to grow so that it will know no bounds. Because when our faith grows, then we have a bigger sized bucket and we can access God's blessings.